Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Your magical kiss take me just so far. Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Don't leave me like this, dangling from a star. Set me all aflame and it's so pleasing. It sure would be a shame if you were only teasing. So my love, before I go, turn the lights way down low and talk to me. Talk to me, talk to me. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year and welcome to the Don McKeag Show. Ken Bukes and Steve Lyden in the control room. You may call us. You'll see the number on the screen. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas and New Year. We did a couple of shows ago, but the station, of course, was closed for the holidays. And I am very glad to be here. If you're a first-timer, we are on Thursdays today from 6 to 7 and replayed at different times during the week. We are on Wednesdays, we are on Fridays, and we are on Sundays, I know, at 3, I believe. But you can keep checking your channels and catch the show. The other thing is, this is our 48th show. Hard to believe, 48 episodes. And you can go to YouTube, those of you that are familiar in using your computer. You can join, you can see this show anytime you want on YouTube. The other thing is that I hope that there are listeners. I know I hear from some of you who are regulars that listen to my radio show on Cape Cod station WXTK Saturdays from 11 to 1. I've been doing 20 years on the radio. And at my stage in life, I am on this show and I'm on the radio show because I've declared war for as long as I'm around and I can speak, because it is serious stuff. This country is really, really in trouble. And I always go to a quote that I'm going to read several things today because I feel our educational system is also in very sad shape. It's not that kids aren't getting educated in fine schools, but there is no continuity and it is politically biased, and it is too liberal and sensitive to emotions rather than to facts and to learning. I was a teacher for 12 years. I taught high school English and coached, so I know of what I speak. But I've come to the point where now every show that I do, television or radio, I quote back to a man who was a devout Roman Catholic priest who he changed the world, literally, and he changed it in the way that we need to change it, and that is spiritually and religiously. We've lost our moral core. There's no such thing in America today, led by the liberal establishment, the liberal left, I call them. There's no such thing as censorship, except to those of us who disagree with them. Then they want to censor us. But Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, ladies and gentlemen. This is what I mean about the failure of this educational system. You ask your grandchildren All your kids, ask them who Martin Luther is, and they will think it's Martin Luther King. They will not know who Martin Luther was. Or if they do, they won't know anything about him, that he took on the world's largest religion at the time, which was the Roman Catholic Church, that had gone corrupt, as all things do that are run by men. Not because the religion was wrong, but because the men running it were not up to the task and were basically flawed. So here is what I always want to read to you and have you ponder it and remember it and hopefully use it in your own families or at the coffee shop or wherever. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? Cowardice. There's too many cowards out there, and they're loaded. Congress is loaded with them, both parties. They know, their conscience knows. They know fiscally how much debt we are trying to struggle with. There comes a time, Martin Luther said, when one must take a position that is neither safe nor politic nor popular. He or she must take that position because his or her conscience tells him it is right. You know, we were all born, well, I think unless you were mentally ill, but the human being is born with the knowledge of right and wrong. Most people would admit to that. But will they do what is right when the chips are down? When they might not get their own way, or their kids, or their town, or their state, or their whatever. Selfish interests. They will yield to what is right, and it starts the ball rolling. I love that expression. A lie requires 1,000 legs. The truth stands on but one. Well, tonight I'm going to read some things that I find are extremely pertinent to the state of affairs right now. We've got the president once again breaking the Constitution that he swore to uphold. We have a caller. Okay, we'll go right to him. And that is to do their best. And, of course, Hillary Clinton's right in there with it. And that is, of course, to eliminate, basically, the Second Amendment, which is and should always be a right to the American people to legally own a firearm for protection against the government and from people like Obama and Ms. Clinton and other liberal Democrats. Unfortunately, some Republicans only care about winning, think they may somehow go along with that. Now let's go to our caller. Welcome.
Don, how are you? It's Jeff.
Hello, Jeff. How are you?
I'm great, man. How's your New Year
Happy
going?
New Year. Well, it's another one. Everyone I get at this stage is a bonus.
Yeah, hey. I mean, I'm glad you're still around, man. I'm glad you read that quote, too. You know, I can't stay on for too long, but this is kind of awkward. But it's funny because the quote that you read at the beginning of every show is actually a Martin Luther King Jr. quote. He delivered it in February 1968 at Washington, D.C. in a speech protesting the Vietnam War, and then reused the quote in a sermon that he delivered on Passion
But he
Sunday.
did not originate it. It is Martin Luther who originally gave that
Martin
statement.
Luther quote that you're thinking of is the one where he said at the Diet of Worms in 1521 when he was speaking to Emperor Charles V, he said, to go against one's conscience is neither safe nor right.
Yeah.
That's all he ever said. The rest of the quote, the part where he says, cowardice asks the question, expediency asks the question, vanity asks the question. That's all Martin Luther King Jr., which...
Well, I will yield to you because I know you've researched it. So I take it from an actual quote from, actually, I've had this for 20 years, so that's very interesting to me, Jeff, and I appreciate, unlike others, I want the correct information to go out over the airwaves.
Yeah, it's from a speech called A Proper Sense of Priorities, February 6, 1968. I can send you the link to the whole speech. He also gave it in a sermon, again, on March 31st, 1968. It's been quoted in the essential writings and speeches of Martin Luther King Jr. Interestingly enough, though, Martin Luther, in 1521, when he was delivering his speech to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, of course, Martin Luther had been brought there because he'd already nailed his 95 Theses to the door. He was trying to start the Reformation. Charles V wanted him arrested. In that speech, he actually talks about conscience, not individual conscience, as being overcoming dogma, which I find interesting. Martin Luther actually believed that he had a duty to remain faithful to the Catholic Church rather than see himself as an individual with a conscience who knew right from wrong. He was totally ready to give it all up to the Church as being the final arbiter of being right and wrong because, again, he was very faithful. But, yeah, that famous quote, I think, of Martin Luther's, where he says, it is never right to go against one's conscience, sort of changes, I think, in the context, because, of course, he wasn't talking about speaking out against a big organization or anything like that. He was actually talking about, look, man, my conscience has to be aligned to the Catholic Church dogma, and I can't go against that. I have to, just be another sort of pawn in the game. But yeah, I just wanted to let you know. And
well, let me ask you this, because this is very interesting to me. Now, my understanding, I know about Charles, slightly, but my understanding, Jeff, is that he was in direct opposition to the Medici, who I believe were the popes at the time, were they not?
The who? I'm sorry, the Medici.
What is it? The not Medici, but the Venetians, who were in control of the Catholic Church, or was that prior to 1520s? I know that's when he gave that speech.
Well, in 1521,
I understood he was opposing, and he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church via the Vatican, and that Charles was only a representative, basically, because he was a king, but he was also a Catholic king, but that it went deeper, that it was Martin Luther confronting the evils and the corruption in the actual Vatican itself.
Yeah, well, Pope Leo the 10th was the Pope. It
was Leo the 10th. Okay, so I'm incorrect.
He was born a Medici, though. But you're right that Martin Luther was opposing the Catholic Church at the time. It's just that he felt that the Catholic Church no longer answered to the Scripture.
Correct.
And that in that speech, where Charles V delivered the Edict of Worms and Martin Luther gave his response, he's saying, look, man, we have to be aligned to the Scripture. We can't be aligned to the interests of men.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the quote that Martin Luther King Jr. gives, I think, is...
So he expanded on a less specific quote by Martin Luther himself.
Yes, although there is some debate as to whether Martin Luther said the famous speech. He certainly delivered a speech, but actually I think it's on ChristianHistory.com. Very recently, a Christian theologian by the name of, I want to say it's Dr. Scott Hendricks, or Dr. Stephen Hendricks, something like that. He found the sources that we have for the Martin Luther speech in 1521 are all printings that were a couple of years later.
I see.
And they originally Hendricks found a transcript, a written transcript of the speech, so earlier than the printings that we have. And the language is a little different, which is interesting. I'd have to look more into that. But so there is some debate as to whether Martin Luther said the things that he actually said, whether we can know exactly what he said. Of course, we can never return to that period and know exactly what he said. But Martin Luther King Jr., I think, took the general spirit, the idea that it's not right to go against one's conscience, and turned it into that very.
Oh, I find that
phrase.
very, very interesting, and thank you very much. I'm going to, now you've whetted my appetite to, I've always used this primarily as a base for human thinking, and also, of course, because I believe in this, the resurgence, not that it should be resurgence, because it's always been with us, and that's why I always go to the 7 deadly sins, which, of course, come from lack of conscience and always seem to signal the demise of great governments and great countries. You know? Mm-hmm. It's always really emanates from a moral decay rather than a financial or military one.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And, you know,
Right.
if I can just make one more quick comment.
Of course you
I'll
can.
let you.
I enjoy it very much.
You know, I think we've had a couple of discussions before about how criticism of America or of the United States government can turn into this sort of cheap anti-Americanism that you see in schools.
Right.
And even though I've brought up things that you may have said, you know, people can turn into anti-Americanism, like the fact that our interventions in the Middle East, we've armed people who've later gone on to become Muslim terrorists and so on. That can certainly be turned into anti-Americanism. But I do think that...
And let me, excuse me for, and let me say that it can be very legitimate criticism, too. This is what, it's the spirit of it, Jeff, that bothers me.
Right.
When it becomes an anti-America as America, and all of our troops, all of our fundamental laws, and all of our great people at all levels, educationally, militarily, and business-wise, when someone runs with that, right, over the behavior of people in the State Department who have their own agenda, in many cases separate from the country itself. That's what bothers me.
Exactly. And, you know, just something that reminded me of the show is I was recently debating someone at my school about Reagan and the Reagan administration.
Right.
And I brought up the fact that, you know, the Reagan administration funded a couple of fascist military dictators in South America, such as in Guatemala,
correct,
Chile, Brazil. And in Guatemala particularly, the dictator by the name of Rios Montt, whom Reagan actually claimed to be a personal friend of. Rios Montt committed genocide against the Maya people of Guatemala, the indigenous population. So this person that I was debating with, you know, said, well, that's just so anti-American. And I said, no, it's the opposite. I love this flippin' country, man. I love its people and I love its history. So when I see us doing things like that in our foreign policy, I have to speak up about it. Because Thomas Jefferson, in the first line of the Declaration of Independence, was saying that a people that loses the ability to criticize their government for not following the will of the people has lost any kind of freedom.
Oh, positively. Positively.
So we need to always be looking at, you know, what our government is doing. And if it's not bending to our will, then it's time to step in and say something about it. But I want to thank you again, Don, for letting me on the show. And
I enjoy it any time, Jeff. It's very informative. I want to thank you because I'm going to check into that more, because I really was more concerned about the actual operation of the Catholic Church in the Vatican, and through, you know, again, the inability to criticize your own religion, which we see. You know, I became a Catholic years and years ago, and but I see how many people in the criticisms, the legitimate sins of any church or any, that they circle the wagons or they move on. Let's move on rather than criticize their own. It's like parents with kids who've done something wrong, and rather than the parents admitting to it, disciplining the child, and not taking it personal, they want to sweep it under the rug, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And the other thing I do not like, that I always point out, is it seems to me to be a Republican that gains the most criticism for things of this nature rather than a Democrat.
Sure.
I've been reading a lot. I adored John F. Kennedy. It was the first president I could vote for. He was an Irishman. He was from Massachusetts. I remember seeing him. I never met him, but I saw him on the Cape when he was still a senator. So that would have been like 59. And I just was so disappointed in the womanizing when that came out, and in reading about their, ongoing battles and willingness to assassinate Castro, and their tremendous involvement in, whether it be properly motivated or not, their tremendous involvement in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And how the press, the pro-Kennedy, pro-Camelot press, in the years continuing on now, have always funneled it away from the Kennedys and into Johnson, and then, heavily onto Nixon.
Yeah.
And that, really concerns me, as it does in the day-to-day press today.
Yeah, I mean, I brought up Reagan just as an example because I do think his...
And a good one. No, I mean, I was a big Reagan fan. And then, of course, you go back to one of the things that I initially had always complimented Jack Kennedy on was I honestly thought, and still do for the most part, that he went beyond party and in choosing his cabinet tried to get the best minds available in the country. There were Republicans and Democrats, but any president, and I'm not trying to make excuses for Reagan, but now you're stuck with the person you choose. And lately I've been doing a lot more reading because I can't stand the television, I can't stand the news. But I've learned so much about Robert McNamara.
Yeah.
And his cold analysis and his refusal to really address the deep problems of human loss, American soldiers in the Vietnam Wars, and his willingness to continue the onslaught and not look at options. And I was appalled.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I mean, I brought up Reagan, but you can go to Carter and his support of the Shah of Iran. You have a bunch of liberals today saying, "Oh, if only we had Carter again, the great human rights guy." But he was supporting the Shah, who starved his own people, had the secret police, the Savak, shooting dissidents in the street and everything. So he was hardly a human rights
and
advocate
who's I've really lost so much respect for, and I was very high on their program, with the Bush family and George Bush Sr. First of all, he forgave the debt from Saudi Arabia, all those loss of boys and young men and women and maimed that are over here living, and they didn't even have to pay the debt after Desert Storm. And he knew the atrocities being committed by the Saudi family on their own people, and they're still doing it.
Yeah. Well, it has a lot to do with resources and how they can help the current government of the United States. Again, it comes back to this fact that if we have a government that's gone rogue and that's not bending to the will of the people and that's doing things out of their own selfish interests, you have a problem. And that's.
But don't you agree? Our people are the problem now, and that is because, as Rome found out, when they started giving people free tickets to the Colosseum and free wine and didn't have to work, they basically had a huge welfare system. And when the barbarians, and when they had trouble with people it was no longer a positive to be a Roman centurion, when it was a heroic job for all those great years of Rome. Then when they needed them, when they needed the workers, you can read Cicero. You read all this. We have to, quote Cicero, we have to retrain our people to work again. Imagine that's right in print. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I mean,
and that's what we have now. We have a people who they're more interested in how many swings somebody playing baseball for $100 million takes in one inning, and how many times they go to the bathroom if they're playing for the Patriots before a game they win, and how many times they went in a game, than what's going on in the country, because they are being, I believe, they're spoiled now. They are spoiled, and we are a deteriorating country from the inside, but that's another story.
Yeah, I mean, well, media definitely just feeds people junk over and over again. There's no information anymore. The news is just entertainment basically now, and you're right. I mean, people care far more about sort of stupid cultural things than they do about what's actually
Well, the government loves it, see, because it takes the attention off of
exactly.
Of
And
what's
that's
really...
why most news networks are funded by major corporations and government-sponsored entities. Clinton's taking money from an oil company in Brazil that exploits their workers so that she'll say good things about them. You won't hear her talking about how, so if you follow the money, you start to see why, information's not getting out. But all right.
Well, I'll let you go. But let me leave you with this. Elizabeth Warren and the Globe has been part of the cover-up. She's had no problem taking huge donations from major corporations and then bad-mouthing corporations. So they're a bunch of hypocrites, both parties. So it's
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Happy New Year.
Don.
I appreciate it. And that leads into what I was going to read. And again, if you're still listening, Jeff, about Abe Lincoln and what he was credited with. And it's the truth, but if you read historically, there's always someone, of course, out there, and not Jeff. He gave me that proper information, which I really am very happy to hear, because I don't want to dispense any information that is not factual or is, attributed to the wrong person. But I remember reading way back about this from Abraham Lincoln, and of course it elevated the great Abraham Lincoln, who was, in many ways. But then it was supposedly negated because it was said by a minister and at the time, and then Abraham Lincoln evidently heard it at church and said it. But it doesn't ring true to me, because it's too much to me like Abraham Lincoln, not a minister, because it's so detailed. And it goes, "You cannot help the poor by destroying the rich. You cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. You cannot bring about prosperity by discouraging thrift. You cannot lift the wage earner up by pulling the wage payer down. You cannot further the brotherhood of man by inciting hatred. You cannot build character and courage by taking away initiative and independence." We've done all of that in today's, and I'm sorry, I believe it in my soul, liberal thinking, liberal control of the minds of this country and of the governmental reins has brought this about. They say I blame liberals because I believe they should be. There's a reason also for the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Liberal programs have not worked for a long time. Not because the intention wasn't sound, but because once they were put in place, there was no honest fiscal responsibility or reviews of whether or not the program was working. The major contributor to liberal programs was Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 30s. And the things he accomplished were not only necessary, but elevated the life of the middle class, created the middle class, and were necessary. They were needed. But also, his cousin before him, Teddy Roosevelt, does not get the credit he should for his liberal measures as president. He was a trust buster, and he brought down those men. They've done a wonderful documentary on Henry Ford and J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, who were SOBs when it came to paying their help. They made billions and continued to, and yet continued to have child labor and to have poor working conditions and terrible wages. But you don't hear Teddy Roosevelt getting the kind of credit because, of course, he was a Republican. I just came upon it. I read it on my radio station now, and I love about, now this is 100 years ago, and this is the only thing that keeps me semi-going, and that is that no matter how down we get, ladies and gentlemen, we must remember we're all human beings, and it's been this way forever. When you put human beings together, you can't help it, especially when they become educated, so-called, and when they become well off, and and when they can control things around them, like their town governments. You see what happens. But Teddy once said, and I've never heard it, and now I heard it, and I read it, and I use it, and that is, it's very easy to tell the difference between a conservative, I think he said a conservative Republican and a liberal Republican. But he said a conservative gets mad when he's lied to. A liberal, on the other hand, gets mad when he's told the truth. And I'm sorry, but that is the truth today. You cannot tell me when you have these things that are proven over, and I don't mean the extreme conservatives or the extreme liberals. I'm talking about that 60% of both sides. They will get mad if they're proven wrong rather than say, gee, like that call means a lot to me, and I am going to not only follow it up, but it's also interested me very much. Kenny, were you out here? Did you have something that you wanted to add to this fabulous first half hour?
Well, first of all, Donnie, I wanted to tell Jeff thanks so much for calling, because he always researches his stuff.
No question.
Intelligent conversation.
I love it. I wish we had more callers like that.
If there were more people like him,
yeah.
But at least he watches. And he doesn't always call, but when he does have a viewpoint, he does give a call.
Oh, I know.
And that's
you
great.
Heard me. I appreciate it very much.
Now, what I did want to ask you is, first of all, foremost, a Happy New Year to you.
Yeah.
And
well,
I wanted to know where we should be telling people the next book signings are going to be, because I know you have a lot to talk about.
Still, yes.
You have a lot to talk about, and I want to get the book signing stuff and get that stuff out of the way, shall we say. So would you like to tell us?
Sure, I will. Well, I want to thank everybody, by the way. We've sold over 500 books, Kenny, so that's
Very
pretty
good.
darn nice. It's only been out since October, early October. Those that don't know, I wrote a book called Well, At Least I Owned a Rolls Royce. It's a memoir. It's light reading. I've been getting nice comments, but it's a fun thing to read, I think, and there's some politics in it, but it's basically about one man's life, mine, and the ups and downs. And but the next signing, which I'm very happy to announce, will be at Titcomb's Bookstore on Route 6A, Route 3A in Sandwich. And it's a Saturday, the 11th, and it will be, pardon me, it's the 16th, not the 11th. It's a week from this Saturday. And it will be from 2 o'clock till 3:30. Sorry, I get confused here. So 2 to 3:30, and I also am looking forward to us putting together a signing some night in the near future, hopefully the 21st, at the Rye Tavern, a wonderful restaurant in Pine Hills. So I will fill you in, and I will also be mentioning more on my radio show. Again, tune in the radio show. You can also call in then from 11 till 1. It's the same show as Rush Limbaugh, Howie Carr, and others of the conservative bent. We're the rare network where you are able to get conservative conversation as opposed to major network. Yes.
Donnie,
Thank you, Ken.
If I'm not able to make it to the book signing,
Yes.
where can I find
Oh,
the
and you
book?
can also go on, my website is donaldmckeag.com. Very easy.
Just like they see it on the screen?
McKeag, donaldmckeag.com. And the website will come up, and you can order the book on PayPal, and I send them out myself from Carver with a nice little thank you note and a bookmark and so forth. So I'm happy. We're still doing well with that. We've done quite a few. I've sold over 70 on Amazon, but I prefer PayPal because it's local and I can send them myself. And also Kindle. We've sold several.
It's available on Kindle?
It's available on Kindle.
Oh, you should always make sure you mention that too.
Yeah, that's right. I forget that. Yeah.
Very good. I'll have to look at that on.
But I think you'll
webpage.
enjoy it. As I said, it was very hard to do. Those of you out there that might be writing. Oh, and by the way, you gave me an opportunity. I want to recommend a book for those of you who think you might like to write. Now, I mean, I'm in my 70s, so I mean, it took me a long time. This was on my bucket list. But it's very hard if you're like me, like most people. You'd say to yourself, who wants to read anything I write? And what you have to remember is you're writing it for you. Or you're painting, you're doing artwork, or you're doing sculpture, or you're doing anything that requires artistic talent or just requires some artistic hard work. And this book helped me. A good friend of mine, who was a sculptor and a wonderful artist, by the way, gave me this book about 6 years ago, and I wish I had it 26 years ago. And it's called The War of Art. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, Pressfield. It's very small. You can take it out at the library. They have it in the Plymouth Library or the Carver Library. I'm sure they have it at Titcomb's and other places. But it's not that expensive to own, and I love having it, and I flip to it. But it's short chapters. And it's talking about the fact, his premise, he became, and now he's a very famous author on ancient Greek history. But he wanted to be a playwright, and it's a whole story. And he talks about all of us with any desires to try any kind of the arts and crafts. Crafts is the same thing, too. That we all have two lives, the life we live and the life we wish we'd lived. And in it, he discusses the resistance factors, he calls them, the resistors. And those are the things in all of us that stop us from doing that thing that we really would like to do or really wish we could do. And they're legitimate restrictions, many of them, family, job, all sorts of things. And but it is so amazing because his story, he only became successful because he wasn't doing well. He couldn't get published. He wanted to be a playwright, and he went out to Hollywood, and he got bounced around out there, didn't get anywhere. And then he wrote an interesting little book called The Legend of Bagger Vance. And those of you that saw, it's a golf movie that's wonderful. And he found the story actually in a Hindu script, and that he was reading, again, in his pursuit of the ancient stories and myths and so forth. And it became so popular. Did you ever see that movie?
I did.
Oh, wasn't it wonderful?
It was.
Matt Damon from, of course,
Yes.
Boston.
Right.
And Will Smith played the caddy.
Right.
And it's a wonderful, wonderful
Great
movie.
story.
Yeah.
Great
And he now, of course, now he's a huge success, and he's written other plays. But get that book or take it out of the library or buy it, and I guarantee it will motivate you. It was like the one thing that jabbed me into, and what he says is you're doing it for your own soul. You're writing or you're sculpting because there's something in your makeup that wants to be released. He also said that if you work hard, I mean really hard, as you know, Kenny, I did. I was 8 and 10 hours near the end. I was at that library, at the Carver Library, and at Plymouth over here. And those girls were wonderful. By the way, too, the staff at both those libraries that we're so lucky to have, and I'm sure they're the same in Kingston and others, but I just focused on Carver and on Plymouth. They couldn't be nicer. They could not be more helpful. And it was just a tremendous, but it was very difficult to do, very. But avail yourself of these things, you know. We're lucky to have these wonderful libraries and the people there to help you. So thank you, Kenny. That's get that book, though. And
Sorry to take you off
Yeah.
topic. Now,
Oh, no, and the last thing, and the Muses, that's what I didn't finish. The Muses, he says, when you work hard, like I was, 8 to 10, they will join in and help you. And you know, you read and you think, oh, that sounds, I am here to tell you, I told you this, Ken.
Yes, you did.
I would drive along, going home, and all of a sudden, something would enter my mind that I had totally forgotten about years ago. And I kept a pad in my car, and I'd pull over and I'd write it down. And that was, again, something that outside of myself that was helpful. So, again, no matter what your age, no matter what your circumstances, this is America. That's a beautiful thing. You can find a place and a time. It doesn't require a lot of money to do and pursue that second life, that you may not live a whole, the whole experience of that life, but why not at least try it? So that's that. Yes, Kenny. Now what else?
I can't believe you're on Kindle. I just can't believe it.
You can't.
Now I heard it right from your lips
Yes.
to my ears, and about quite a few thousand people's ears.
Yes.
Very good, Donnie. Very good. On with the show.
All right. Well, now we were. I just thought I would go back to the ancients again, and the things that we should be, I believe, and why I'm on this show, and what I'm trying to do. It's the teacher in me, is to spend what time I've got on this planet to. Sometimes I feel like I'm the man who knew too much. Remember, there was a movie about that. I forget who was in it. But I think those of us that live long enough, unfortunately, too many people today worship the young. They elect the young. They like the looks of the young. And the young, in so many cases, especially politically, they haven't had the experience. They don't know what they're talking about, other than they have an aide or something. I'm talking about Congress. Most of them never owned a business. Too many politicians today, they go and they study political science, and then when they graduate, they either go to law school or they go and work for a politician and then go to law school at the same time, or they become a lawyer, and then, of course, they run for office themselves. They've never owned a business. They've never taught school. They've never done a lot of the things that are integral, I believe, in terms of doing a good job. We have, especially the wealthy. I don't care how well-intended they are. They don't know what it is to be short at the end of the month in your checking account, and you've got dental bills all of a sudden come in, or the car breaks down. They don't know what it is to own a business and have a fire where the place shuts down, or to have to deal with the insurance companies, or to have to deal with the snowstorms and other things. And I know it's always been that way, but we don't have the right people running anymore because, of course, it is now a club, and it's been for 100 years. It's nothing new. And, of course, politicians are held in very low self-esteem, and rightly so. And I believe it's because in order to get there, they sell their soul, both parties. Well, this is Cicero, who lived, by the way, from 106 BC to 43 BC. Considered to be one of the great philosophers of the human experience, a Roman. Not to know what has been transacted in former times is to be always a child. If no use is made of the labors of past ages, the world must forever always remain in the infancy of knowledge. Now, the more common statement of that is those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Now, would anyone suggest that the Boston Patriots, who I watched, they played in BU Field, some of you remember, Babe Parilli and Jim Colclough and Milt Graham and Art Graham and Gino Cappelletti, who just is retired. Would anyone think that today's Patriots would be playing and using the same field, the same equipment, or the same formations as today's? No, of course not. They'd be laughed off the field, and there'd be no way they'd win. And yet, politically, other than technology, politically, we have not learned a darn thing, other than the power of the press. And now we have the press totally biased. And they keep throwing out Fox News as if this makes everything all right. Fox News is one small part, although they, of course, their listenership is 5 times the others combined, which shows how out of touch the major networks are, or I should say how biased they are. And yet, this is what we have the public looking at voting. No different than 100 years ago. They know less, I would suspect, about the candidates than they did 100 years ago. And they have been programmed into voting for the one that's going to give them the most for nothing. That's the Democratic Party. By the way, I was a committed Democrat for probably 40 years, 35 or 40. Although I did vote for Reagan, I was part of the Democrats for Reagan, and I did vote for a couple of other. I voted for Bush Sr. Because I'm conservative, and I just. But here's what I wanted to. I also read this again just to keep you appraised of the past. In 1887. Now, it's 2016, so if it was 2017, this would be 131 or 231 years ago. No. Gosh, I used to be able to do it right in my head. 1887, all right, 13 makes it 1900, so that's, 100, yeah. So anyway, You can figure it out. Round it off. 140 years or thereabouts. And he said then, he was a professor at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. The Athenian Republic, he was, again, like my friend Stephen Pressfield. A democracy is always temporary in nature. It simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. We're talking once again, and you'll hear me continue to bring it up because it's choking this country, and that is government employees. Never mind government policy, government employees. Constantly rewarding government employees in order to get their support so that they can get elected. From the moment that they realize that they can get themselves increased wages, I'm talking about this in my own words now. The majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse over loose fiscal policy, which is then always followed by a dictatorship. This president is truly a disgrace. Oh, they wrap him up and they support him and everything he says, the press I'm talking about. But he is really a disgrace, and that is, of course, because not only is he incompetent, has no business being the president, but he's surrounded himself with biased people with an agenda, not only a racial agenda, but also a lack of any kind of personal experience. Can you imagine Al Sharpton, the Reverend Al Sharpton, having his own television program on the basis of intellect or the basis of experience? And you look at his track record. Doesn't pay his taxes. There's a couple of... Now, he happens to be black. I don't care whether he's black or not. His criticism by me has nothing to do with him being black. But it has everything to do with him being close to the president and with him having his own TV show to be politically correct by the major networks. The man has absolutely no right to be, and no, I don't know who watches it. They cover that up. It's very poor listenership, but it doesn't matter if you're a liberal, if you're a Democrat. By the way, I was talking about different things on the show the other night. By the way, this gun control thing, I love this little saying here about guns. See now if I can find it. A gun is like a parachute. If you need one and don't have one, you'll probably never need one again. Think about that. Think about that. We've got the media and we've got Hillary Clinton. I'm glad they're doing this, because I think as Ted Kennedy was a friend of mine, and Ted Kennedy told me personally when he ran in 1980, he had been pushing some gun control measures. And he had huge support in all the AFL-CIO, the other unions, and when he traveled the country. And he honestly told me it had Chappaquiddick, everybody says that cost him, well, it didn't help, certainly. And this divorce from Joan. But bottom line, he said, was once those articles came out about the NRA, or about gun control, he said, I was done. And I'm glad that that's still the case. Now, I'm not for, and I hear people talking about no one should be able to buy, Uzis and other. You can't. You can't walk into a store and get assault weapons. That's another thing the left keeps pumping. I understand. I'm not a gunman. I don't care to own a gun. But I'll tell you, the founding fathers, like everything else, were geniuses, and there's a reason, and the reason is to protect ourselves. Never mind this government of lunatics that we've got. But how about foreign? How'd you like to have some foreign force come in here and have all these people that have guns in their homes not be able to defend themselves? That make you feel good, do-gooders? Do-good liberal feel-gooders? And yet this president and these liberal Democrats have no problem with letting people come into this country illegally over the borders, no criminal check. They fill our courthouses throughout this country. We have that beautiful girl from San Francisco who was murdered, raped and murdered, that should have been out of this country not once, not twice, not 3 times, 5 times. Not only did the president not even go to her folks, but the press let it die as a story. And you want this kind of person? You want Hillary Clinton, who's a confirmed liar, habitual liar, she and her husband? You cannot trust them to tell you the truth? I tell you, here's about another one that they criticize America. Just listen to this. Boy, we're near the end, right, Kenny? You got 3 minutes here.
4 minutes.
Yeah, I got it. Here's the complaints, 6 of them, by these anti-American people. And again, as Jeff, our caller, and I both talked about, criticism is not only healthy, it's part of our democracy. You're supposed to be able to criticize. But again, criticism that's educated, that's based on specifics is one thing. Just calling America a horrible, when you have bird brains that were able to get a display in the Smithsonian Institute about 10 or 15 years ago that showed all sorts of the Japanese that were maimed and burned at the bombing of the atomic bomb, World War II. And that was on display as criticism of us and statements criticizing us for ever dropping the bomb when it saved conservatively over 500,000 American soldiers' lives, and it wasn't our fault. We tried, Harry Truman, MacArthur, they all pleaded with Japan to throw down their weapons and surrender, and they refused. And we've got these bird brains in this country criticizing us saving 500,000 plus American soldiers' lives. That's the kind of nitwittery we have in the liberal establishment today, and they get jobs in the Smithsonian. Here's the criticism. 1, America is capitalist and greedy, yet half of the population is subsidized. Half of the population is subsidized, yet they think they're victims. They think they're victims, yet their representatives run the government. Their representatives are in the government, yet the poor keep getting poorer. The poor keep getting poorer, yet they have things that people in other countries only dream about. They have things that people in other countries only dream about, yet they want America to be more like those other countries that they left. That's the kind of foolishness. Well, ladies and gentlemen, show number 48, 2 more, Kenny, and we're up to 50. Remember, you can see other shows if you like what we're saying here on YouTube, the Don McKeag TV Show, and it'll come right up. God bless you. Happy New Year. Take care of yourself. thanks very much for watching. Thank you.